This is Dear Strategy, episode 132. Welcome to another episode of Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions about product and business strategy. Real lessons from real strategies and real companies, just like yours. Welcome back, strategy creators, to another great episode. This is episode 132, and back on track a little bit. So not a lot of time passed between episode 131 and 132, but can't promise the same in the future. But what I wanted to do in this particular episode is get down to some of the lessons that I promised you, which is the majority of what I want to try and do for this show as we go forward. Kind of taking some lessons from the workshops that I deliver, the classes that I deliver, and really kind of giving you some pointers, some tips as to what those things are that we teach. And this will serve as a refresher for people who have taken our courses and workshops, and also serve as a knowledge base for some of the people who have not worked with us. And maybe this will inspire you to give us a call and work with us in the future if that's something that you desire to do. So today I want to talk about something that is a very common stumbling block for people in the strategic process. When I teach strategy classes, product management classes, even classes supporting product development, all of which we do through a company that I own and founded, Strategy Generation Company. Check us out at strategygeneration.com. But when I teach those classes, segmentation is, of course, a big part of what you need to do before you start putting together a plan for strategy development, whatever it is. And the reason for that, of course, is that most of the companies that I'm working with are quite large. Even if you're a small company, your audience or your customer base is quite large, and you can't go after everybody the same way. So a key part of strategy is determining who it is that you want to go after, who it is that you want to target, so that you can have a strategy that targets the needs of that particular group. And that means that whatever you put out there as a strategy or a solution is going to be a lot more effective because you're targeting that smaller group of people. And even the largest companies with the biggest product breadth will do some level of segmentation, because you can't be all things to all people. If you try to be, you'll probably be ineffective. So segmentation is a huge thing. And yet, even though it's extraordinarily important, it tends to confuse people quite a bit. And what I want to do is try and give you the basics of segmentation, simplify it a little bit, talk to you about some of the different methodologies that exist out there to do segmentation, just so that you can get an idea of how to approach this. Now, I will tell you that segmentation can be done in regards to any number of different disciplines. So we talk about it in terms of putting together a plan. But you could use segmentation for marketing as well, right? In fact, it's one of the biggest areas that it's used in, is to say, hey, we don't want to advertise to everybody the same way. So we need to figure out who it is that we're trying to advertise to. And that way we can figure out where those people are hanging out and target our ads and our campaigns at just those people, wherever it is that they're looking, right? Which is why, if you have a product that's, hitting a certain demographic or targeted at a certain demographic, you're going to try and advertise on, let's say, a television program or somewhere else where that demographic is watching. And that's going to get you the most bang for your buck. Otherwise, you're going to spend billions of dollars on advertising. Maybe not that much, but you get the idea. Lots and lots of money on advertising that's going to be highly ineffective. So that's a big area that segmentation is used. But a lot of people kind of think that that's where it originates, right? As it's used for advertising and marketing. But in fact, where it should originate is in the strategy that was developed for the products and services that are being advertised. So segmentation should have been done way earlier than the promotional stage, right? It should have been done way back when you decided to develop a product or introduce a product, because you need to understand who it is that product is supposed to be solving a problem for. And by targeting a certain segment of the population, you could be sure that whatever solution you're putting in place is going to meet that segment's needs. Now, when you go to advertise it, you advertise at the segment that you targeted the product for, right? So you get the idea of how this works. Now, you would be surprised at how frequently companies miss this little this little thing. So maybe they didn't do the segmentation up front. They developed a product based on some cool idea that they had that they think people will like. And then after they develop the product, they have this great new technology. They scurry around looking for the audience that would be most likely to embrace it. And that's just not the most effective way to do it. So we want you to segment at the strategic level, right? Segment in your strategy, segment for the development process. And then when you introduce that product that you've developed and strategized for, you're introducing it to the segment that you designed it for. So that's the idea. Okay. So that's kind of just a broad base of where segmentation is used. But now let's talk a little bit about how to do it. Okay. How to do it. And of course, how to do it is a lot more than I can cover in a 15-minute podcast, but I want to give you some tips and pointers. First of all, understanding that customer segmentation should be defined as grouping customers based on common needs that they have with respect to whatever product or service you're trying to sell them, right? So you can't take a segmentation model for one product and assume that it's going to apply to all products in your company, because customers will have different needs with respect to one product than another, which means by definition, you'll probably be grouping them differently. So an easy example of this is, let's say I'm a pharmaceutical company and I have a drug in my portfolio that is targeted specifically at ailments that only elderly people get. Well, in that case, age is probably a pretty good way to segment your customer base, at least, one level of your customer base, because, this drug is only going to apply to people of a certain age, right? That's when they get these types of ailments. But if I have another drug in my portfolio that's targeted more towards, curing some disease that maybe is age agnostic, in other words, people of any age might get this disease, then age is probably not the best way to segment for that particular drug. So I have two different drugs in my portfolio, same company, but two different methodologies that I might use to segment based on the needs for those particular products. The reason I even bring this up is because one of the biggest mistakes that I see companies making right out of the gate is they segment their customer base based on the data that they have available. In other words, they have some data available as to how many people are in certain age brackets or certain, different demographics or whatever it is. And they say, okay, so we're going to segment based on that because we know what that information looks like. But if those different segments don't apply to your product, meaning that there's not different needs among those different segments that you have data on, then that's not the right way to segment for that product. So you have to think about segmenting based on needs first and foremost. Now, once you've done that, now what you need to do is decide, well, what is the right methodology to use to segment? And there are 4 basic methodologies that are commonly referred to in most textbooks. Like everything, these have been expanded and, and added to and enhanced and whatever else you wanted to call it. But these are the 4 that are most commonly referred to. The first one is geographic. So based on where customers reside, right? The second one is demographic. And that's based on some statistical customer data. That could be things like age or income or education level, anything that kind of categorizes customers based on certain statistics that you have available on them. Then you have psychographic, which is based on the way customers feel, their preferences, their attitudes, things of that nature. And then you have behavioral, which is based on the way customers act, the things that they actually do, the actions that they actually take, which, by the way, admittedly, there's a blurry line between psychographic and behavioral because feelings lead to actions, but you could see how those things could be differentiated. So those are the 4 big overarching methodologies that you could use to segment your customer population. But within any one of those, you can choose any number of different variables to create your actual segments. So example, geographic, I can choose to segment by country, by region, by state, by even location within a certain area. So maybe inside an airport and outside an airport, right? Or something like that. All of those are examples of geographic segmentations. What you've done is you've decided the big methodology I'm using is geographic, but then within that, I have to choose what variables I want to actually use to create my segments, right? The same thing can apply to any of the other ones, right? If I pick demographic, for example, I can choose age, income, education, religion, any of the number of different demographics that might exist, but I have to choose the right variable to create those segments based on the needs for my product. And just like we talked about before, those things have to align. Psychographic, behavioral, the same thing. So the actual segments that you're going to create are variables underneath one of those big four categories that I gave you of geographic, demographic, psychographic, and behavioral. So that's kind of the way that you would approach segmentation. Now, this is where things get a little tricky, is that if you have one segmentation model, one variable that makes sense for you, segmentation becomes simple, right? So I say, I'm going to use demographics. I'm going to use age. I'm going to create certain age brackets. That's going to be the way I segment. That aligns perfectly with the needs for my product. And that's the way I'm choosing to segment. That's going to allow you to create these segments, decide what are the different needs among those different segments, and then ultimately decide which of those segments you want to target with your product, with your strategy, with your advertising, and so forth. Very, very simple, very, very straightforward. Unfortunately, it's never quite that straightforward because there's never one model that can be applied to any given product. And in fact, there may be any number of different variables that you can segment by that would apply equally to your product. So maybe for any given product, I could say age is a good way to segment, but you know what else is a good way to segment? Based on their preferences with respect to my product. And so now you have to figure out a way to bring those two things together. And you could do that in a couple of different ways. One way to do it is to take kind of a hierarchical approach, right? So you could say, okay, age is going to be my first pass at segmentation. So I'm going to have 3 age brackets. And then within each of those brackets, I'm going to look at preferences with respect to certain things. So maybe you have 3 preference brackets beneath each age bracket. So 3 by 3, you end up having kind of 9 different segments that you've created, right? So, age group 1, people who feel, like A, B, and C, right? And then age group 2, people who feel like A, B, and C. Age group 3, people who feel like A, B, and C. So now you've got those kind of 9 segments that you've created. So that hierarchical approach, I suppose you can create as many hierarchies that you want. I usually recommend you kind of limit it to 2, 3 at the very max, because obviously the more segments you have, the more complex the exercise, and kind of you get diminishing returns. I mean, you can imagine you could segment by any number of variables and it would be accurate. So I usually recommend brainstorming the variables that you think might apply to your segmentation and to your product, and then choosing out of those the 2 that are the highest priority, the 2 that you think would apply the most to your product and represent the differing needs the best. Okay. And then you can create a hierarchy out of that. Another methodology that you can use to kind of create, or utilize 2 different segmentation variables is by creating what many people call clusters, right? So picture a matrix where you have one set of variables on the top, another set of variables on the side. So let's say we have the 3 preferences on the side, the 3 age brackets on the top. And now you have essentially a 3 by 3 matrix that you've created. So you still have those 9 blocks of segments. But what the clustering technique would say is, now that we have these 9 resulting segments, let's look to see which of those blocks have common needs with respect to your product. And now we can kind of group those together. So out of those 9, you might cluster maybe, 2 or 3 of them, right? And you create 3 resulting segments from those 9 blocks. Now that is a little difficult to explain over the radio, like we're doing right now, a little easier to see. And so when I write the article for the blog post that goes along with this episode, I'll try and give you a little bit more of a visual But of course, also this is what we cover in our classes as well. So if you really want to learn how to do this, then, give us a call and then we'll talk to you about the options that you have to kind of learn this in a classroom setting. But that's the basics of it, right? So again, making sure that segments are aligned with the needs with respect to your product or service, choosing from one of the 4 big categories of segmentation, choosing variables within those categories, prioritizing them, and then choosing 1, 2, max 3 that you want to create your segments from. And then you can create those from hierarchies or from some type of a matrix or clustering methodology. And that will allow you to get to your resulting segments. So a lot to digest there, I recognize, but hopefully you can follow some of that just through the audio that I'm giving you here. And then of course, if you want to learn more, go to our blog. So that's at dearstrategy.com or dearstrategy.net. Just click on this episode, which is episode 132, and it'll take you to the episode, and you can click on the blog post from there and you'll be able to see some of this in action. And hopefully this will give you an idea of how to approach segmentation, because it does tend to be something that people are confused by. It tends to be something that really trips people up, and it's really not as difficult as it seems, but there is some ways to do it that are more effective than not. And hopefully this puts you on that right path. Okay. So feel free to explore that further. While you're doing that, don't forget to make time for the plan, and we will see you back here on another episode of Dear Strategy. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for listening to Dear Strategy with Bob Caparelli. To learn more or to submit a question to be featured on our show, please visit us at dearstrategy.net.